17 years of lies, one night of truth. A family torn apart by secrets you never saw coming.
You know that moment when someone close to you whispers something that changes absolutely everything? That instant when the entire world seems to freeze, and you realize with crystal clarity that nothing will ever be the same again. Well, that was my Christmas. I was sitting in the living room of our house in Toronto that particular afternoon when the smell of kimchi mixed with American apple pie seemed to mock the perfection everyone expected from the holidays. My stepdad walked in with an expression I'd never seen before, and honestly, looking back now, I realize that's where my story truly begins. Not with the Christmas lights or the decorated tree my mom had spent 3 weeks arranging with her usual perfectionism, not with the carefully wrapped presents stacked under the branches, but with that single moment when he looked at me and whispered those words that would completely unravel the entire tapestry of lies my family had woven for years. My name is Jiwoo Park, though most people here in North America just call me Jay. I'm 25 years old, and I work as a graphic designer at a mid-size marketing firm downtown. I've lived in Toronto for most of my life, since I was 8 years old, actually. Before that, my mom, my grandmother, and I lived in Seoul with my biological father. That's a detail that matters, though I didn't understand why until much later. You see, when you grow up in a blended family, you learn to accept certain things without really questioning them. You learn that families are complicated, that love doesn't always look like you thought it would, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the deepest. My stepdad, Robert Mitchell, came into our lives like a character from one of those romantic movies my grandmother loved to watch. He met my mom at work on an ordinary Tuesday evening in 2007. She worked in administrative support at a law firm, and he was visiting as a client. By all accounts, it was one of those chance meetings that feels like destiny when you're young enough to believe in such things. She was 42 years old, he was 47. Both had been through difficult divorces, though his was messier than hers. He had 2 adult children from his first marriage who lived in British Columbia, and they rarely visited. My mom viewed this as romantic, a man who'd been hurt but was still willing to try again. What she didn't see, what I didn't see, was the calculated way he moved through their relationship. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I was 8 years old and Robert entered our lives, I didn't have the cynicism or the life experience to recognize manipulation. I just saw a tall man with kind eyes who learned to cook Korean food so he could impress my grandmother. He brought my mom flowers. He helped with my homework. He became the father figure I'd been missing since my biological father had become increasingly absent after the divorce. My mom was so relieved to have a partner, someone stable and dependable, that she never questioned anything too deeply. That's the thing about being a single mother in a foreign country. There's this desperate hope that someone will come along and make everything easier. Robert seemed to be that person. He'd been born in Toronto, had a successful career in real estate, and owned his own home in a nice neighborhood near the Scarborough Bluffs. He had status. He had money. He had what everyone told my mom she should want. So she married him 6 months after they started dating. Some people might say that was rushed. Looking back, I'd say it was insane. But I was just a child trying to navigate a new country, a new language, and the absence of my father. I welcomed the stability. Now, 17 years later, I understand that stability was an illusion. It was a carefully constructed facade that my stepdad had built so meticulously that none of us could see the cracks until it was far too late. My mother never suspected anything because she didn't want to. My grandmother was too distracted by the TV dramas she watched and the gossip she shared with the other Korean aunties in the community. And me? Well, I was too caught up in the normal teenage angst of trying to fit in at school, trying to pronounce my name correctly so people wouldn't butcher it, trying to feel Canadian while looking distinctly Korean. We existed in this strange in-between space, and Robert was the anchor that kept us all in place, or so we thought. He never hit us, he never yelled excessively, he never did any of the overtly cruel things that would have triggered alarm bells. Instead, he was subtly controlling. He managed the household finances tightly. He made decisions about where we lived, what we ate, what we should aspire to become. He did it all with such quiet authority that questioning him felt like ingratitude. My mother adapted to his way of doing things because her own culture taught her to respect the male head of household. I adapted because he was my legal guardian, and children are remarkably good at convincing themselves that dysfunction is really just family culture. My grandmother was the only one who occasionally pushed back, especially after a few glasses of soju with the other Korean aunties in the community. But she was old, and everyone dismissed her concerns as cultural misunderstanding or generational conflict. But that Christmas Eve, everything shifted. It was the day before Christmas, around 6 in the evening. The house was warm and smelled like galbi jim, the braised beef short ribs that my grandmother had spent all day preparing. My mom was setting the table with the nice dishes she only used for special occasions, the kind of dishes she'd brought with her from Korea, delicate ceramic pieces that represented some version of home she'd left behind. I was sitting on the couch, supposedly wrapping last-minute gifts, though mostly I was just scrolling through my phone, avoiding the tasks I'd been given. Robert came home from the office early, which was unusual. He always worked late, especially this time of year when people were buying or selling real estate for tax purposes. But that day, he came home at 5:30, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he took off his coat. My mom noticed too, I think, but she didn't say anything. We'd all learned not to press him when something seemed off. He headed straight to his study, a room that was basically his private sanctuary. We weren't encouraged to go in there. He had important documents, he said, client confidentiality, he explained, privacy, he demanded. For 17 years, my mom had respected that boundary. But that evening, something was different. He called me into his study about an hour later, after my mom had gone to the store to get more ice cream for dessert. My grandmother was in her room getting ready for our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. It was just the two of us in that room, surrounded by his dark wooden furniture and the framed certificates on the walls that proved his legitimacy in the world of real estate and investment. I remember sitting in that chair across from his desk, the leather creaking slightly as I settled into it. I remember how the winter sun was fading outside his window, casting long shadows across the floor, and I remember him looking at me with an intensity that made something in my chest tighten.
"Jay," he said, and his voice was different. Not the calm, controlled voice I'd grown accustomed to over 17 years. This voice was strained, like someone pulling a rope that's about to snap. "I need to tell you something your mother doesn't know, something nobody knows." I felt my heart start to race. You know that feeling when your body knows something's wrong before your brain can catch up? That's what it was like. My palms started to sweat, my throat felt dry. I wanted to stand up and leave, but something kept me pinned to that chair. "You need to know the truth," he continued, leaning forward across his desk. His eyes were bloodshot, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. Maybe both. "About your father. Your real father." I blinked. My biological father had been a subject we rarely discussed in our house. He'd moved back to Korea when I was 10, and our communication had dwindled to birthday cards and the occasional awkward video call. I hadn't seen him in person in over a decade. What could Robert possibly know about him that I didn't? "What about him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder, the kind you see in movies when someone's about to reveal something life-changing. He slid it across the desk toward me, and I just stared at it for a moment, too afraid to open it. Your father didn't go back to Korea because he wanted to. He went back because I made him leave. The room felt like it was spinning. What do you mean you made him leave? I had information, he said, and there was something in his tone that I'd never heard before. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Information about his business dealings, things that weren't exactly legal. I told him that if he didn't leave and give your mother full custody, I'd report him to the authorities. He'd have been arrested, deported, possibly imprisoned. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My biological father, the man I'd spent years resenting for abandoning us, hadn't abandoned us at all. He'd been blackmailed, forced out of our lives by the man sitting across from me now, the man I'd called my stepdad for 17 years. Why? I managed to choke out. Why would you do that? Because I loved your mother, Robert said, and his voice cracked. Because I wanted to build a family with her, and your father was in the way. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that he was a criminal and you were all better off without him. But I was lying to myself. I did it because I'm selfish, because I wanted what I wanted, and I didn't care who I hurt to get it. I opened the manila folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents, photocopies of business transactions, bank statements, immigration records, evidence of everything Robert had just confessed. My father's so-called criminal activities looked, at best, like minor tax irregularities. Nothing that warranted being blackmailed out of the country. Nothing that justified 17 years of absence from my life. Does my mom know? I asked, my voice hollow. No, and that's not all. Those 4 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Not all. There was more. Of course there was more. Because if 17 years of lies taught me anything, it was that there was always more. Your grandmother, Robert said, and now his hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together on the desk. She knew. She's known for years. The betrayal hit me like a physical force. My grandmother, my halmoni, the woman who'd raised me when my mom was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, she knew. She'd known that Robert had blackmailed my father, had torn our family apart, and she'd said nothing. She tried to confront me about it once, Robert continued, and I could hear the tears in his voice now. About 5 years after we got married, she found some documents I'd left out by mistake. She threatened to tell your mother everything, so I threatened her back. With what? I demanded, my voice rising. With deportation, Robert said, and the shame in his voice was palpable. Your grandmother's immigration status wasn't completely clean when she first came to Canada. There were some irregularities, some documents that weren't properly filed. I told her that if she said anything, I'd make sure she was sent back to Korea and she'd never see you or your mother. I couldn't breathe. The room was closing in on me. Everything I believed about my family, about my life, about the people I loved was crumbling like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Robert stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. Because I'm dying, he said simply. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4. And I can't die with these secrets. I can't leave this world knowing that I destroyed your family and never gave you the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd built his life on lies and manipulation was now desperate for redemption in his final months. But it was too late for redemption. The damage was done. I've set up a trust fund for you, Robert continued, still facing the window. Everything I own will go to you when I die. The house, my investments, my savings. It's worth about $3 million. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but it's all I have to give you. Money. He thought money could fix this. He thought $3 million could compensate for 17 years of lies, for a father stolen from me, for a grandmother forced into complicit silence. I don't want your money, I said, standing up. I want my father back. I want those 17 years back. I know, he said. And when he turned around, I saw that he was crying, real tears streaming down his face. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry would never be enough. I left his study and went straight to my grandmother's room. She was sitting on her bed wearing her best hanbok for the Christmas dinner, and the moment she saw my face, she knew. She knew that I knew. "Jay," she said, reaching out for me, but I stepped back. "How could you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How could you know and say nothing?" "I had no choice," she said, and she was crying now too. "He would have sent me away. I would have lost you both. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could at least protect you and your mother. I thought I was doing the right thing. You weren't. You were being a coward." The words hung between us like a knife. My grandmother, who'd always been so strong, so resilient, looked suddenly small and fragile. But I couldn't comfort her. Not now. Not when everything I'd ever known was a lie. I went to my room and called my biological father. It was early morning in Korea, but he answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting 17 years for this call. "Appa," I said, using the Korean word for father that I hadn't spoken in over a decade. "I know what happened. I know why you left." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him crying. Deep, racking sobs that broke something inside me. "He never wanted to leave you," he said in Korean, his voice thick with tears. "Not a single day. I thought about you every moment. I wanted to fight, to stay, but he said he'd destroy me. He said he'd make sure I never saw you anyway. So I left, thinking at least this way you'd be safe. You'd have a stable home." "I needed you," I said, and I was crying so hard now I could barely get the words out. "I needed my dad." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have been braver." We talked for 3 hours that night, filling in the gaps of 17 years, sharing the moments we'd missed. He told me about his life in Korea, how he'd remarried but never had more children because he couldn't bear to replace me. I told him about growing up in Toronto, about becoming Jay instead of Jiu, about all the times I'd needed him and he wasn't there. By the time I hung up, it was nearly midnight. Christmas Eve had turned into Christmas Day, and nothing in my life would ever be the same. I confronted my mother the next morning, on Christmas Day, with Robert sitting beside her at the kitchen table. I laid it all out, the blackmail, the threats, the lies, everything. My mother's face went through so many emotions I couldn't track them all. Shock, disbelief, anger, grief, betrayal. She looked at Robert like she was seeing him for the first time, and in a way, she was. "Is this true?" she asked him, her voice deadly calm. "Yes," Robert said. Every word. My mother stood up from the table, walked to their bedroom, and started packing. No screaming, no dramatic confrontation, just cold, efficient action.
She called a lawyer that afternoon, filed for divorce the day after Christmas. By New Year's, she and my grandmother had moved into a small apartment downtown, and I went with them.
The apartment was nothing like the house in Scarborough. It was a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a building near Koreatown, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors through the walls and the elevator always smelled faintly of kimchi and curry. My mom took the smaller bedroom, insisting that my grandmother and I shared the larger one. At 25, sharing a room with my halmuni felt like regression, like I was a child again. But I didn't complain. We were all just trying to survive. The first week was the hardest. My mom barely ate. She'd sit at the tiny kitchen table with a cup of tea that would go cold while she stared at nothing. My grandmother tried to cook all her favorite dishes, jjigae, japchae, homemade mamdu, but my mom would just push the food around her plate and excuse herself. I'd find her sometimes at 2 a.m, sitting on the balcony in the freezing January cold, wrapped in a blanket, crying silently. "I gave him 17 years, she said to me one of those nights when I brought her another blanket. 17 years of my life. I trusted him with everything. With you." "I know, Amma," I said, using the Korean word for mom that I rarely used anymore. "How did I not see it?" she asked, and the pain in her voice was so raw it physically hurt to hear. How did I not know what kind of man he was? I didn't have an answer for her. How do you explain that some people are so good at lying that the lies become more real than the truth? That Robert had spent nearly 2 decades perfecting his mask, and by the time it slipped, it was too late. But something else was bothering me too. Something Robert had said that night in his study that I hadn't fully processed until we'd moved out. He'd mentioned documents, evidence of my father's supposed criminal activities. But when I'd looked through that manila folder more carefully in the days after Christmas, I'd noticed something strange. The dates on some of the documents didn't match up. Bank statements from 2008 that referenced transactions from 2006. Immigration records that were clearly altered, with different fonts and spacing inconsistencies. I took the folder to a friend of mine, Marcus Chen, who worked in forensic accounting. We'd gone to college together, and I trusted him. I showed him everything, and he spent 3 hours going through each document with a fine-tooth comb. "Jay," he said finally, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "These are forgeries. Really good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. See here?" He pointed to a bank statement. "The watermark is wrong. This one's from 2010 at the earliest, based on the security features, but it's dated 2007. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? He's saying that whoever created these documents knew what they were doing, but they'd made mistakes. Small ones, but mistakes. Your father's business dealings, from what I can see here, they were completely legitimate. Maybe a bit aggressive tax-wise, but nothing illegal. Nothing that would warrant deportation." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach all over again. So Robert made it all up? Not made it up exactly, Marcus said carefully. He fabricated evidence to support a narrative. The question is, why go to such lengths? I thought about that question for days. Robert had been dying. He had nothing to lose by telling me the truth. So why lie about the documents being real? Why not admit that he'd fabricated everything from the start? Unless there was something else, something he hadn't told me. I started digging. I went through Robert's financial records, the ones that had been part of the trust transfer. My mom had given me access to everything, too heartbroken to deal with it herself. And that's when I found it. A series of payments, made monthly for the past 15 years, to a woman named Susan Cho. Susan Cho. The name meant nothing to me. I Googled it and found dozens of women with that name in the Toronto area alone. But then I cross-referenced it with Robert's address book, which I'd found in a box of his personal effects, and found a phone number. I called it on a Thursday afternoon in mid-January. The snow was falling outside my apartment window, thick and heavy, the kind of snow that makes Toronto look clean and beautiful before the cars and salt turn it gray and slushy. "Hello?" A woman's voice, older, cautious. "Hi, my name is Jiwoo Park. I'm looking for Susan Cho." There was a long pause. "Who gave you this number?" "I found it in my stepfather's address book, Robert Mitchell. He passed away last month." Another pause, even longer this time. I know who Robert Mitchell is. What do you want? I need to know why he was sending you money every month for 15 years. I heard her intake of breath, sharp and sudden. You're the daughter. Ji-woo? He talked about you. You knew him? Knew him? She laughed, but it was bitter, harsh. I was married to him. The world tilted. What? I was Robert Mitchell's first wife. Well, his second wife, actually. The one nobody talks about. The one he erased from his history. I felt my hands start to shake. That's impossible. He said his ex-wife lived in British Columbia. He said they had 2 adult children. That's his first wife, Angela. She does live in BC with their 2 kids. I'm the wife that came after her. The wife he married in 2003 and divorced in 2006, right before he met your mother. My mind was racing, but why would he hide that? Why would he pay you money every month for 15 years? Because I knew things, Susan said quietly. Things that weren't exactly legal. He wasn't a real estate agent. Well, he was, but that wasn't his primary income. He was running what you might call a creative tax shelter scheme for wealthy clients, and I helped him do it until I realized how deep we were and wanted out. So he paid you to stay quiet, I understood. He paid me to disappear, to pretend our marriage never happened, to keep my mouth shut about what I knew, and for 15 years, I did. Why are you telling me this now? Because he's dead, Susan said simply, and because you deserve to know the truth. Your father, Jay, the one that Robert said was a criminal, Robert projected his own crimes onto him. Everything he accused your father of doing, Robert was actually doing himself. The offshore accounts, the money laundering, the tax evasion, it was all Robert. I felt sick. My father was innocent? Your father was completely innocent. Robert needed him out of the picture so he could marry your mother and get access to her money. Did you know your mother had a life insurance policy worth $500,000? That she had inheritance money from her parents in Korea? Robert saw her as a mark, Jay, a woman alone in a foreign country, vulnerable, trusting. He manipulated her into marrying him so he could control her finances. I hung up the phone and ran to the bathroom where I threw up everything in my stomach. When I was done, I sat on the cold tile floor and cried. Not just for my father, who'd been wrongly accused and exiled, not just for my mother, who'd been used and manipulated, but for myself too, for the little girl who'd believed that Robert was her savior, when really he'd been the architect of her family's destruction. I told my mother everything that night. We sat in that tiny living room with my grandmother, and I laid it all out. The forged documents, Susan Cho, Robert's real criminal activities, the fact that he'd targeted my mother specifically for her money. My mother listened in silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, she stood up and walked to her bedroom. I heard her crying through the walls for hours. But the next morning, something in her had changed. She was still sad, still grieving, but there was anger there too. And anger, I was learning, could be a powerful motivator. "We're going to the police," she said over breakfast. "We're going to report everything. If Robert defrauded people, if he committed crimes, they need to know." "He's dead," I pointed out. "What's the point?" "The point," my mother said firmly, "is justice. Not for him, but for everyone he hurt. And we're going to contact your father. We're going to apologize. We're going to make this right." She was true to her word. We went to the police that afternoon. We brought them everything. The documents, the financial records, Susan Cho's testimony. They opened an investigation. It turned out Robert had been running his scheme for over 20 years, defrauding dozens of clients out of millions of dollars. The $3 million he'd left me, it wasn't even his money to give. It was money he'd stolen from other people. The police seized everything. The house, the bank accounts, the investments,
all of it. The trust fund disappeared overnight. I went from being a millionaire to having nothing in the space of 48 hours. But strangely, I felt relieved. That money had been poison from the start. Blood money, guilt money, money built on lies and theft and manipulation. I didn't want it. I never wanted it. My father flew back to Toronto in February. It had been 17 years since I'd seen him in person, and when he walked through the arrivals gate at Pearson Airport, I almost didn't recognize him. He was older, grayer, more tired-looking. But when he saw me, his face lit up with such pure joy that I started crying before he even reached me. "Appa," I said as he pulled me into a hug. "My Jiwoo," he said in Korean, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter, I've missed you so much." We talked for hours that first day. He stayed at a hotel downtown, and I spent every evening with him for the 2 weeks he was in Toronto. He told me about his life in Korea, about the business he'd built from nothing after being forced to leave Canada. He told me about the nights he'd spent crying, wondering if I was okay, if I remembered him, if I hated him for leaving. "I never stopped loving you," he said, "not for a single day. I wanted to fight, to stay, but Robert made it very clear what would happen if I did. He said he'd make sure I never saw you anyway. He said he'd turn you against me, and I was so afraid of losing you completely that I thought maybe leaving was the better option. At least that way there was a chance you'd find out the truth someday." "I'm so sorry," I said. "I'm sorry we believed him. I'm sorry we didn't fight for you." "You were a child," he said gently, "and your mother was trying to survive. You have nothing to apologize for. This was Robert's doing, not yours." He met with my mother too. That meeting was harder, more complicated. There was too much history, too much pain. But they talked for 3 hours in a cafe near our apartment, and when they came out, there was something like peace between them. Not reconciliation, not romance, but understanding. A shared acknowledgement that they'd both been victims of the same man's cruelty. My grandmother was the one who struggled most with my father's return. The guilt of her silence ate at her, and no amount of reassurance could ease it. She'd known the truth, or part of it, and she'd said nothing. She'd chosen her own safety over the truth, and that choice had cost my father 17 years with his daughter. "I was a coward," she told me one night, crying in our shared bedroom. "I should have been brave. I should have told the truth, even if it meant being sent away." "You did what you thought you had to do to survive," I said, holding her hand. "Robert was a manipulator. He knew exactly how to control people. This wasn't your fault." But I'm not sure she ever really believed that. The guilt followed her like a shadow for the rest of her life.
The police investigation revealed even more than we'd anticipated. Robert had been involved in schemes that went far beyond tax evasion. He'd been laundering money for criminals, helping wealthy clients hide assets during divorces, even facilitating immigration fraud. His entire life had been a carefully constructed lie, and we'd been props in his performance of normalcy. The media got hold of the story in March. Suddenly, we were all over the news. Local real estate agent's secret criminal empire exposed. Family discovers stepfather's decades-long fraud. I couldn't go outside without seeing our faces on newspapers, on TV, on social media. People I'd known for years suddenly had opinions about my family. Some were sympathetic, understanding that we'd been victims too. Others blamed us, said we must have known, must have been complicit. The latter hurt more than I wanted to admit. I lost my job. My boss said it was about restructuring, but I knew the truth. They didn't want the negative publicity of having me around. My mother lost clients too. My grandmother stopped going to her church, too ashamed to face the other Korean aunties who'd once been her friends. We'd traded one nightmare for another. We'd escaped Robert's lies, only to find ourselves trapped in the public spectacle of his crimes. But we survived. Slowly, painfully, we rebuilt. My mother got a new job at a smaller law firm that didn't care about the scandal. I started freelancing as a graphic designer, working from home to avoid the public eye. My grandmother found a new church in a different neighborhood where nobody knew our story. And my father, bless him, stayed. He didn't have to. He could have gone back to Korea and resumed his life there. But he stayed in Toronto for 6 months, helping us navigate the legal aftermath, helping us heal. He found an apartment near ours and visited every day. We had dinner together as a family, me, my mom, my grandmother, my father, for the first time in 17 years. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the family I'd grown up with or the family I'd imagined I might have. But it was real, built on truth instead of lies. And that made all the difference. Robert died 6 weeks after his confession, just like he'd predicted. Cancer took him quickly in the end. I didn't go to the funeral, neither did my mother nor my grandmother. His adult children from his first marriage came and handled everything. They seemed confused by the coldness, but I didn't explain. It wasn't my story to tell them, though I suspect they found out eventually when the media coverage intensified and Robert's crimes became public knowledge. The trust fund Robert set up did come to me, just as he'd promised. $3 million appeared in my bank account 30 days after his death. I stared at that number for a long time, thinking about what it represented. Then I called the police and told them to add it to the restitution fund for Robert's victims. Every penny. I didn't want a single dollar of his guilt money. 1 year after Robert's death, I received a letter in the mail. It was from one of his victims, a woman named Margaret Santos. She wrote to thank me for returning the money, for cooperating with the police, for not trying to keep the stolen funds. She told me that Robert had defrauded her elderly father out of his retirement savings, and that the restitution was allowing him to live with dignity in his final years. That letter meant more to me than $3 million ever could have. My father eventually went back to Korea, but now we talk every week on video calls. He's dating someone new, a kind woman who teaches English in Seoul. He seems happy, actually happy, not the performative happiness that Robert had always displayed. I'm planning to visit him next summer, to spend a month in Korea reconnecting with my heritage, with the part of myself I'd let fade away when Robert entered our lives. My mother started dating again too, though very cautiously. She's seeing a man named David who works as a teacher and has absolutely no interest in her finances. They go to movies and out for dinner, simple dates that she never had with Robert. She laughs more now, not as much as she used to before Robert, but more than she did during those 17 years. My grandmother moved back to Korea last September. The guilt was too much for her, she said. She needed to be around her people, her language, her memories of a life before Robert. I visit her twice a year now. Our relationship is healing, slowly, but the trust that was broken may never fully mend, and I've made peace with that. As for me, I'm still processing it all. Some days I'm angry, so angry I can barely function. I think about all the moments I missed with my father because of Robert's lies, birthday parties he should have attended, school graduations he should have witnessed, the everyday moments of growing up that we'll never get back. Other days, I'm just sad, mourning the childhood I should have had, the family I should have known. But I'm also learning something important. Healing isn't linear. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes you take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And that's okay. I changed my name legally 6 months ago. No more J, just Jiwoo Park. I wanted to reclaim that part of myself that I'd let fade away. I wanted to honor my father, my real father, who'd been forced to give up everything because one man decided his desires mattered more than the truth. When I got my new driver's license with Jiwoo Park printed on it, I cried. But they were good tears, healing tears. I also started seeing a therapist.
Dr. Sarah Lim, a Korean-Canadian woman in her 50s who specializes in family trauma. She's helped me understand that what Robert did wasn't just lying or manipulation, it was systematic psychological abuse. He'd isolated us from the truth, controlled our perception of reality, and made us doubt our own judgment. That kind of abuse leaves scars that don't heal quickly. You're grieving multiple losses at once, Dr. Lim told me in one of our sessions. You're grieving the father you lost, the years you can't get back, the stepdad you thought you knew, and the family structure you believed was real. That's a lot for anyone to carry. She was right. I was grieving all of those things, plus something else I hadn't quite articulated. I was grieving my own innocence, my ability to trust blindly. Robert had taught me that people aren't always what they seem, that love can be a mask for control, that family can be built on foundations of lies. Those lessons once learned can't be unlearned. But I'm also discovering something else, something Robert never intended. His lies brought our real family back together. His death freed us from his control. His confession, as selfish and last-minute as it was, gave us the truth we needed to heal. In trying to secure his redemption, he accidentally gave us ours. My stepdad told me on Christmas that I needed to know the truth, and he was right. The truth destroyed the family I thought I had. The truth revealed 17 years of lies, manipulation, and systematic abuse. The truth showed me that the stability I'd cherished was built on a foundation of threats, blackmail, and stolen money. The truth hurt more than I've ever experienced. But the truth also set me free. Free to know my real father. Free to understand my past. Free to build a future that isn't based on lies. Free to become Ji Woo again, instead of the person Robert had tried to mold me into. So if you're watching this, and you're sitting on a truth that's eating you alive, here's what I want you to know. Tell it. Tell it before it's too late. Tell it before the weight of it crushes you. Tell it because the people you love deserve to know, even if knowing hurts them. Tell it, because lies, no matter how well-intentioned, no matter how carefully constructed, always cause more damage than the truth ever could. And if someone tells you a truth that shatters your world, do what I did. Sit with it. Feel it. Let yourself be angry and hurt and betrayed. Cry until you can't cry anymore. Rage against the injustice of it. But then, when you're ready, and it might take weeks or months or years, start rebuilding. Because the truth, as painful as it is, as devastating as it can be, gives you something lies never can. A solid foundation to build your life on. That Christmas changed everything for me. My stepdad's confession destroyed the family I thought I had, but it also gave me back the family I'd lost. It showed me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't wrapped in pretty paper under a tree. Sometimes the greatest gift is the truth, no matter how much it costs. And sometimes the hardest part of receiving that gift is learning to live with it.